The summer sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sarah Martinez stood in her pristine backyard, watching the final touches being put on her long-awaited pool installation. After 18 months of permits, planning, and payments, today was supposed to be perfect. The grand pool party she'd been promising her neighbors for weeks. The crystal-clear water sparkled like liquid diamonds, the deck furniture arranged just so, and coolers packed with ice-cold refreshments lined the patio. Everything was ready for what should have been a celebration of community and friendship, but as Sarah adjusted the colorful string lights one final time, a familiar and unwelcome figure appeared at her back gate. Margaret Hendricks, the self-appointed queen of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, marched across the manicured lawn with the determined stride of someone who lived to ruin other people's joy. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair didn't dare move in the gentle breeze, and her clipboard, that dreaded clipboard, was clutched against her chest like a weapon of mass destruction. "I'm afraid this little gathering of yours ends right here. Right now," Margaret announced, her voice cutting through the peaceful afternoon air like nails on a chalkboard. Her cold blue eyes surveyed the scene with obvious disapproval, taking in every detail of Sarah's carefully planned party setup. "There are serious violations here that simply cannot be overlooked." Sarah felt her stomach drop as she watched Margaret's thin lips curl into that familiar smirk, the same expression she wore every time she delivered devastating news to unsuspecting homeowners. The anticipation that had been building for weeks suddenly transformed into a creeping dread that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath her feet. This confrontation would uncover secrets that neither woman could have possibly anticipated, setting in motion a chain of events that would expose the true nature of power, deception, and the price of blind authority in their seemingly perfect suburban paradise. For Sarah, this wasn't just about a pool party, it was about everything she'd worked towards since moving to Sunset Ridge 3 years ago. The pool represented months of overtime at her marketing firm, countless weekends spent researching contractors, and the fulfillment of a promise she'd made to herself after her divorce, that she would build a home where joy and community could flourish, more than just concrete and chlorine. This pool symbolized her fresh start, her independence, and her commitment to creating the kind of neighborhood gathering place she'd dreamed of as a child. The emotional stakes ran even deeper. Sarah had invited everyone on the block, families who had never spoken to each other, elderly neighbors who rarely left their homes, and newcomers who were still finding their place in the community. This party was meant to bridge the invisible barriers that HOA politics had created over the years, bringing people together around something positive for once. She'd spent weeks baking cookies for the children, researching everyone's dietary restrictions, and even learning a few words of Spanish to better connect with the Rodriguez family next door. But Margaret's intervention threatened to destroy more than just one afternoon of fun. If the HOA could arbitrarily shut down a properly permitted gathering on private property, what did that say about the rights of homeowners? What precedent would this set for future community events? Sarah realized that backing down now would signal to Margaret, and to every neighbor watching from their windows, that fear trumped fellowship, that bureaucratic bullying was more powerful than community spirit. The financial implications were equally staggering. If Margaret succeeded in forcing Sarah to dismantle the pool setup, the wasted food, decorations, and preparation would cost hundreds of dollars. But more concerning were the potential fines and legal fees that Margaret was already threatening. The HOA had a history of pursuing expensive legal action against homeowners who dared to challenge their authority, and Sarah's modest savings account couldn't withstand a prolonged legal battle. As neighbors began arriving, children clutching pool toys, adults carrying covered dishes, Sarah realized that this moment would define not just her relationship with the HOA, but her standing in the entire community. Would she be remembered as someone who stood up for what was right, or as another homeowner who crumbled under Margaret's intimidation tactics? Just as Sarah began to respond to Margaret's demands, a sleek black sedan pulled into her driveway with the quiet authority of official business. Two figures emerged, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, and a younger woman carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Their movements were precise, professional, and completely at odds with the casual pool party atmosphere. Margaret's confident demeanor faltered for just a moment as she watched the newcomers approach. "I don't know who you think you are," she called out, her voice slightly higher than usual, "but this is HOA business and doesn't concern outsiders." The man smiled politely but didn't slow his stride. "Actually, Mrs. Hendricks, this concerns us very much. I'm David Chen from Meridian Property Management, and this is my colleague, Jessica Torres, our legal compliance specialist." He gestured toward the pool area with obvious appreciation. "We're here to discuss some recent developments regarding this property and the broader Sunset Ridge community." Sarah felt her world tilt slightly off its axis. Property management companies only appeared when something big was happening, usually something involving money, ownership, or legal complications that regular homeowners couldn't handle alone. She watched Margaret's face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and the first hints of genuine concern as the implications began to sink in. I wasn't informed of any property management involvement, Margaret said, her clipboard now trembling slightly in her hands. As HOA president, I'm supposed to be notified of all external business matters affecting our community. Jessica Torres opened her briefcase with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news. That's actually one of the reasons we're here today, Mrs. Hendricks. There have been some significant changes in the ownership structure of this neighborhood that affect your authority as HOA president. Gathering crowd of neighbors sensed the shift in atmosphere. Children stopped splashing at the pool's edge. Adults set down their drinks. And even the background music seemed to fade, as everyone strained to hear what these official-looking visitors had to say. Sarah realized that her simple pool party was about to become the backdrop for revelations that would reshape everything they thought they knew about their community. Margaret's face flushed deep red as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. That's impossible, she snapped, her voice cracking with indignation. I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. I know every property deed, every ownership record, every legal document in this entire subdivision. No changes can be made without my approval, and signature. David Chen exchanged a meaningful glance with his colleague before responding with the calm patience of someone who'd delivered this type of news many times before. Mrs. Hendricks, I understand your confusion, but I'm afraid your information is significantly outdated. 3 months ago, Meridian Property Management completed the acquisition of all common areas, recreational facilities, and enforcement rights for Sunset Ridge subdivision. The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Neighbors who had been chatting and laughing moments before now stood in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant for their homes, their investments, and their daily lives. Sarah felt her knees weaken as she realized that her pool party had accidentally become ground zero for a community-wide earthquake. That's legally impossible without homeowner notification. Margaret practically shrieked, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. There are laws. There are procedures. You can't just buy an HOA without proper notice and voting. Jessica Torres pulled out a thick folder of documents, each page bearing official seals and legal stamps that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. Actually, Mrs. Hendricks, we can, and we did. Your HOA board voted unanimously to sell all management rights to our company after falling behind on insurance payments, maintenance obligations, and several outstanding legal judgments. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Parents grabbed their children closer. Elderly residents clutched each other's arms for support, and even the teenagers stopped pretending they weren't interested in adult drama. Sarah watched neighbors' faces cycle through disbelief, anger, and fear as they realized their community had been sold out from under them without their knowledge or consent. But I never voted for any such thing, Margaret protested, her voice now desperate rather than authoritative. I would never agree to sell our HOA to some corporate vulture. David Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was a slight edge to his voice when he replied. According to our records, Mrs. Hendricks, the vote was indeed unanimous among all active board members. Perhaps you should check your meeting minutes from April 15th. As Margaret frantically flipped through her clipboard papers, Sarah realized that the power dynamics of her entire neighborhood were shifting and somehow her innocent pool party had become the catalyst for exposing years of hidden corruption and mismanagement. The tension reached its breaking point as Margaret's frantic paper shuffling revealed the truth. She had been desperately trying to hide. Her face went from red to pale white as she found the meeting minutes from April 15th, and Sarah could see her hands trembling as she read her own signature at the bottom of the document. I don't remember, double quotes, Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of concerned neighbors. But Jessica Torres wasn't finished. She opened a second folder and pulled out a different set of documents, these bearing Margaret's signature on multiple pages. Mrs. Hendricks, these are the personal loan documents you signed using HOA funds as collateral. When the loan went into default, Meridian Property Management acquired your debt, and with it, the management rights to this entire community. The assembled crowd gasped, collectively, as the full scope of Margaret's betrayal became clear. She hadn't just sold out their community, she had gambled away their rights and freedoms to cover her own financial mistakes. Years of tyrannical rule, arbitrary fines, and petty enforcement actions had all been leading to this moment of reckoning. Sarah felt a surge of vindication, mixed with profound sadness. All those times Margaret had wielded her clipboard like a sword, threatening homeowners with fines and violations, she had been operating under borrowed authority that she'd already mortgaged away. The woman who had terrorized the neighborhood for years had been living a lie, and that lie had finally caught up with her. But here's where things get interesting, David Chen continued, his professional demeanor softening slightly. Ms. Martinez, you might be surprised to learn that your property deed contains some very special provisions. Sarah's heart stopped as all eyes turned to her. What could possibly be special about her modest 3-bedroom house and newly installed pool? Your property, including this beautiful pool area, sits on land that was originally designated as the Community Recreation Center. When the original developer went bankrupt 15 years ago, This lot was sold separately, which means it was never technically part of the HOA jurisdiction. The revelation hit like lightning. Sarah realized that all of Margaret's threats, all her demands and violations and arbitrary rules, had been meaningless from the very beginning. Her property had always been sovereign territory, free from HOA control. But nobody had bothered to check the original deed restrictions. Which means, Jessica added with a slight smile, that Ms. Martinez has every right to host community gatherings. And as the new property management company, we're actually required to support and encourage neighborhood unity activities. Margaret sank into one of the pool chairs, her clipboard falling forgotten to the deck, as the weight of her fall from power became undeniable. The woman who had ruled through fear and intimidation was now just another neighbor, stripped of authority and exposed for the fraud she had always been. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sarah's pool party transformed from a neighborhood gathering into something much more significant, a celebration of liberation and community healing. The revelation of Margaret's deception had initially shocked everyone, but as the truth settled in, neighbors began to talk to each other with a freedom and openness that hadn't existed in years. Children splashed joyfully in the pool, while adults shared stories of Margaret's past tyranny, comparing notes on arbitrary fines and ridiculous violations that had made their lives miserable. The Rodriguez family brought out their guitar. Elderly Mrs. Patterson emerged from her house for the first time in months, and even the teenagers joined in organizing impromptu pool games that brought generations together. David Chen and Jessica Torres had departed after ensuring that all legal questions were answered, leaving behind copies of new community guidelines that emphasized cooperation over control, community building over rule enforcement. The contrast with Margaret's regime couldn't have been more stark, where she had sought to divide and intimidate. The new management actively encouraged the kind of gathering that was spontaneously flourishing around Sarah's pool. Margaret herself had quietly slipped away sometime during the early evening, her fall from grace complete, but not without a strange sense of relief. Neighbors reported seeing her later that week, actually smiling at children playing in the street, perhaps freed from the burden of constantly policing others. She might finally learn to simply live among them. Sarah stood at her kitchen window as darkness fell, watching her neighbors reluctant to leave the warm glow of the patio lights. The pool party that was supposed to last a few hours had become an all-evening celebration of community rediscovered. She realized that sometimes the most powerful victories come not from fighting tyrants, but from simply creating spaces where joy and connection can flourish naturally. The lesson was clear. Authentic authority comes from service and community building, not from fear and control. Margaret's reign of intimidation had ultimately collapsed under its own weight, while Sarah's simple act of hospitality had accidentally liberated an entire neighborhood. In the end, the surprise inside wasn't hidden in the pool or the party. It was the power of community to heal itself when given the chance to come together, in truth and friendship. As she finally locked her door and headed to bed, Sarah smiled, knowing that her pool would continue to serve as a gathering place where neighbors could connect as friends, rather than subjects under a tyrant's rule. The real victory wasn't defeating Margaret Hendricks, it was discovering that the community they all wanted had been there all along, just waiting for someone brave enough to open their gates and invite everyone